Hey everybody! Before we get started with the show, I just wanted to let you know that during the recording of this show, episode 103, we had a lot of system failures that caused the live stream to be interrupted. So you'll notice because I'll be back when it happens that we crashed several times and we lost some content. So a little bit of the show is a little bit disjointed. We apologize for the inconvenience and we're trying to get the problem fixed. But in the meantime, here's episode 103, How to Change.
Stand with you from everywhere. What do you most desire? Look inside them there. From the east there comes the sound. From long ago it's here today. Join with your band of brothers, X-Oriente.
Hey, welcome to X-Oriente for the third time, is it? Third time's the charm.
Sure. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, so we have like a new remote system that automates a bunch of stuff, and everything all went off at once. So if you saw the very first attempt tonight we made to go live, you saw a cacophony of
Oops a daisy.
oops. Hey Jason, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing great. I am
Excellent.
doing just awesome. So last week we had to abort the show, kind of the middle. Hopefully, we won't have to do that again this time. But
I think we're just starting, actually. We had only gotten like 5 minutes in, so.
yeah, we were just starting. So this one, we're talking about sort of how to change and really kind of. It's more, I think, about the role of innovation, and sort of what the role that innovation plays in Freemasonry. And how did we start it off last week? Do you remember, Jason?
I don't.
Okay.
Tried to forget last week. Now, we talked a little bit about the conservative nature of Masonry,
Mm-hmm.
and that Masonry inculcates us right away with don't change anything, don't change anything. And some people might take that too literally. And we talked about how that talks about what that's talking about is ritual, and it's a goal, and something that we should be shooting for. But at the same time, you go back in history and our ritual has radically changed. So clearly, people weren't listening. But that inevitably we do have to change or we'll die.
Yeah.
We have to stay relevant. We have to stay moving forward. As a good football coach, Bill Parcells once said, life is a treadmill. If you're not pushing as hard as you can to move forward, then you're just going backwards.
Mm. So it's a motorized treadmill.
Correct.
Yeah.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, and so I think that whole thing comes from something that shows up in Anderson's Constitutions back in jolly old 17, what was it, 24, 23, where he says, it is not in the power of man to make innovations in the body of Masonry.
Yep.
And I think where we kind of netted out with that was that when we say the body of Freemasonry, what we're talking about is certain things and not everything.
Right.
Right. And what we're talking about is like you said, is ritual, is the content of the degrees. Basically, I'd say if it's regulated by Grand Lodge code, then it's really for Grand Lodge to change. And I think if you stray too far from that, then your regularity gets called into question, and then
sure. And the other thing I was thinking about too is our officer positions are pretty well regulated. and haven't changed. So, you know, I mean, there are a couple things like that. I mean, you know, how many lodges have you been with no senior warden?
Right.
So,
Well, that's and it's kind of part of ritual, isn't it? I mean, isn't there like an
oh, absolutely it is.
yeah.
It absolutely is. And so, you know, but I don't think that that the officers' positions exist solely because of ritual. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, but they're codified. They're codified in ritual. So there's certain positions that are codified in ritual.
Sure.
Because it's you know, like as part of their, like, without going into what the ritual is.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah, sort of, kind of. You're right. Because there are differences in ritual. Emulation ritual is different than, you know, Preston Webb ritual, blah blah blah. But you know, there's no the position, the officer position of inner guard only shows up in emulation.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so, like, there's some variance there.
Yeah.
BBF, my mother lodge has an inner guard. It's only been one guy.
Just cause.
Forever. Yeah. But we had an inner guard for a while, even though he's not in the ritual, anything like that. We just chose to sit him there. It was fun.
Yeah, and our lodge has we have an organist. We have an official.
Yeah, there you go.
Actually,
we
used to have an official almoner. He was this sort of beloved guy who's no longer on you know, with us. His name was Del Yarnell, and he would, you know, he had this velvet bag with a, you know, bejeweled square and compasses, and he had
Did he keep his dice in it?
No, actually, he would collect the almonds,
right.
alms, the alms,
Alms for the almoner.
yeah, alms for the almoner. He would collect the alms in the bag, but he would tell these, like, really outlandish, nutty stories. He was an actor by trade, and we had a member of our lodge by the name of Harold Spellman, who was, I believe, he was the head of the BBC orchestra for many years.
Wow.
And then moved to America and settled in Chicago and was a band orchestra leader. He was our first almoner, and then when he retired to Arizona and passed it on to Del. And so Del had his apron and would wear his, you know, it's like it's English, just a standard old English, you know, blue apron with three rosettes, you know, but it took on this very special meaning. And I remember buying him once. I found it on eBay, an almoner's jewel that is a British thing. And we also have an organist. We have an official organist.
That's really cool. That's nice to have, by the way.
Oh, no, it's great. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too far afield here, but very early in my Masonic experience, you know, we didn't really have anybody playing organ or doing music during ritual or anything like that. And my friend Morgan, in their lodge, in Federal Lodge Number 1, they do have an organist, and who plays for and during the ritual and stuff like that. And he was like, "Oh, we got to do this." When we started Colonial Lodge, and I was like, I don't really care. And he was like, no, you got to try it. You got to try it. It adds a huge amount to the ritual. And damn it, he's so right. It really, really makes a difference. And if you get a good organ player who's playing good organ music, wow, it is really, really cool.
Yeah. Well, we actually had a good organ player, and the problem was that he didn't really, like, play, like, you know, like there'd be some sort of processional, and while the guy was processing, it'd be like, you know, like, right. It was sort of like a ball game almost, you know.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
But the guy who does it now is he's a filmmaker, and he has, like, you know, a whole, like, soundtrack just lined up on his Mac, and he has.
See, now that's great. That's cool too. That's really cool. Yeah, our organist, the first organist that I saw, what really convinced me about it was during one of the processionals. He played the funeral march of Queen Anne, which is the opening music for A Clockwork Orange. And it's so cool. It's just super eerie. And I was like, yep, you win. That set the mood and then some.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So there's definitely innovations. Mike is on is in the comments, and he mentions that the lodge education officer in some jurisdictions is an official position, and yeah, absolutely. But so here's the question that I think we started to ask just when we dropped off, which was, what should and shouldn't, I mean, we know what shouldn't change, right? We just talked about that, but what should change? Right. What is sacrosanct, and how do we know the difference? Is there a test?
I think that's a really, really good question. I think you start at the beginning of that one, perhaps, to try and start answering that, and because you have to break it down, and you have to start at the beginning, which is what should change. And the simplest answer to that, in really any form, what should change is, well, what doesn't work? Answer that question first. What doesn't work? And then once you've identified those things that don't work, can you discard them? In our case, so if I figure out, well, this piece of ritual just doesn't work, well, you're probably sniffing up the wrong tree, and no, you can't change that. So move on to something else. But if you're doing something in a lodge that just plain doesn't work, if you're doing something in a grand lodge, for God's sakes, that doesn't work, discard it, move on from it. Don't play the game of but we've always done that. I think what's really interesting is that we get caught here in a paradox of we're an old organization. We have a long organizational memory. There are guys who've been doing this for 50 years. We've got tons of guys with 50-year pins in this jurisdiction, tons, and they're really active, and their experience is really, really helpful. But that being said, their experience can sometimes, save us from making a terrible mistake that has been already made in the past, and something that we don't have to make again. But sometimes that experience can steer us away from progress that we're trying to make. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Makes absolute sense.
And I think that's a real danger that we come across, and that's a danger that we're hitting on both ends, right? And it's a common problem where you've got the experience of these older guys, and then the new guy, out there, all piss and vinegar, ready to go. And so I think that the true wisdom of it is trying to decipher, who's right. Are we going to make the same mistake again, or are we going to make some progress and move forward? That's hard to say, and so in any of those situations, I think the most important thing to do is to communicate, to talk to each other, to try and figure out, where we're all coming from. And if it's a mistake that can be made again, why not just try it? And if we make the same mistake again, well, so be it. We've confirmed, yes, you do this, you'll make that mistake.
Yeah.
And so, if it doesn't hurt anybody, what's the harm in trying?
Well, I think it's how you try, which is,
right,
makes a huge difference. And actually, I have a bit of expertise. I actually have a degree, a master's degree in innovation, from the Institute of Design. And I think really what it is how you change is as important as what you change, right? So there's a method that is very helpful, and there's some principles. So like the thing is like, I think one of the problems with innovation in Masonry is that the changes that need to be made are they're very big, they're very complicated, they're systemic changes. I think there are so it was kind of described to me like this: like there's complexity in systems, right? But then there's also ambiguity, and solving for complexity is very easy, right? The way that you fix complexity is you just simplify everything. You break a complex problem down into simpler bits, right? And just keep breaking it down until you've got simplicity. Ambiguity is much harder, right? Because it sort of talks about, what should I change and how do I change it? Like, where are the opportunities for they call them opportunity spaces for innovation. I just want to stop a second. Are we having difficulties again?
Yeah, definitely. Like we're freezing a lot.
Not sure if we should just power on. I'm loath to restart the. Hang on one sec. Let me.
I hear nothing.
All right. Really, you're not hearing anything?
I wonder if any. Well, Mike hears us and sees me.
Yeah, I'm gonna try.
Hi, Mike.
I'm gonna try.
Can you hear? Can you hear Eric? Huh. That's too bad.
What's going on?
That's so weird. Okay, then.
All right, I'm going to do something here.
I blame this all on Eric. Huh. Visual is spotty, but the audio is perfect. That's interesting. That is really weird. Huh.
Yeah, so I'm all right, just hang with it. Hang with us
my
here for
audio
a second.
is just dead.
Hey, everybody. So at this point in the broadcast, our systems crashed and we lost a little bit of the audio and video feed. So we'll pick right back up where we resumed. We are sorry for the inconvenience. All right. Well, hopefully that fixed the problem.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Wouldn't it? So anyway, if you're back with us, thanks for sticking with us. I have a feeling that this is like a software version issue or something like that. But be that as it may, let's get back to our discussion.
There you go.
Let's see.
You were talking about breaking the problem down.
Breaking the problem down, right? So breaking it down. So there's a couple principles that you need to kind of be aware of. One of them is that critical thinking applies here, right? So in other words, if we're going to change, we have to have a very clear and firm understanding of the problem, right? Which means that we cannot take anything on faith. Where we get into real problems happens because we think we know what the problem is, and so we think we're solving the right problem, and it turns out we're not solving the right problem at all. Right. So that's the first principle. The second principle is we build to know, right? We build to learn something, right? Which means that the reason that we make a prototype is that it's an experiment. It's a way of testing a hypothesis. So that means that when we do innovate, right, we innovate from the perspective of a hypothesis, and then we prototype that hypothesis to prove the hypothesis. And if the hypothesis is proven, right, then we have something to like that, then we can start to scale the change, right? So in other words, we might only test something out in 1 lodge, 2 lodges, 3 lodges, and then we start to scale it out and see if this is something that is tenable.
Right. Is it a local answer versus is it a global answer? Exactly.
And then the third principle is that we iterate with small changes to make a big change, right? This is interesting because I was having a discussion just the other day with a friend of mine who is he's a past master of our lodge. He is someone I greatly respect, and he is the district deputy grand master of the district that our lodge is in. Mm-hmm. And they do these very infrequently, but they're going to do a Grand Masters Festival. And it's like, I understand,
Does that come with big turkey legs? What is a Grandmaster's Festival?
So a Grandmaster's Festival is basically a 1-day class, right? That's what they call it. So it's a 1-day class. And so, like I understand why these kinds of things are attractive to Grand Lodges. And
Sure.
and so there's this sort of underlying assumption that the reason that people are not becoming Masons is that it's inconvenient for them, right? It takes up too much of their time, and their time is highly discretionary.
Which by the way is is a terrible answer to that question. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's a terrible answer, because if it's inconvenient for them to join, wouldn't it then follow that it would be inconvenient for them to be a member of any value?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, honestly, I'm an idiot and I can figure that out.
Well, and I think that's a situation where they're solving, I think that they're solving the wrong problem. But then there are other kinds of dynamics that come into play. So, for example, in many of the one-day classes that I've seen, they're co-sponsored by an independent body, right? So you either have the Scottish Rite or the Shrine that is sort of co-sponsoring them. Mm-hmm. So let's take a hypothetical problem, right? So let's say that you're the Grand Master in the state of Fredonia, right? Okay. You're in the Grand Lodge of Fredonia, and about 60% of the lodges in Fredonia are on what you call life support, right? But and what that means is that they're not able to perform their own degrees without help. Meetings pretty much consist of, reading the minutes, paying the bills, maintaining the lodge building, and charitable fundraising. Okay. And interestingly, there's a guy, I saw this YouTube video. I think it was posted in the Texas Freemasons Facebook group, but it's this guy. He did a video called "Why I Left Freemasonry," and it was. I've
seen that too.
Have you? You've seen that video?
It's not a video. It's actually a letter that was written.
No, this guy did a video.
Yeah, I know, but I think it comes from a letter. I think it's old, like pretty old. Maybe.
It looked like a couple of years old, and I think he's actually came back to Freemasonry. But basically, what he said is just that, like the meetings were just completely anticlimactic to his degrees. Right. The average age in the Fredonian lodges is well past retirement age. Most of the young men grow up in the town, leave town for jobs in the cities.
Right. The Fredonian steel industry has collapsed.
Yeah, pretty much. And the officer line is a revolving door of basically like the same 20 guys, right? So it's, you have a master who's been master maybe like 3 or 4 times already.
Absolutely.
And because so many of these guys are elderly, they're on fixed incomes, which means they can't really raise dues. Mm-hmm. So they don't really have very good dinners. Mm-hmm. And so men who do join either leave out of boredom or devote their energies to appendant bodies. Mm-hmm. And then most of the new members are the sons and grandsons of existing members who are doing it, to kind of make dad or granddad happy, or it's something that they were curious about as kids, and so now they're of age and stuff like that. So here's the thing. I don't want to. This is not really about the merits of whether one-day classes are a good thing or a bad thing, or the Masons who go through them are good Masons or bad Masons. That's a dead horse that we don't need to flog, right? But what I do want to point out is kind of like sometimes when you're looking at a problem, you need to look at it. You need to frame it a little bit differently. And so let me give you an example of what I mean. Mm-hmm. Right. So here is, take a look at this, right? So you have the Blue Lodge and the Shrine, right? And they are competing with each other, right? Okay. So the Blue Lodge is basically like a source of candidates for the Shrine, mm-hmm. and the Shrine, because of its programs, it creates an incentive to maintain membership in the Blue Lodge.
Correct.
Right. So there's this sort of symbiotic relationship between the Blue Lodge and the Shrine. But at the same time, they both compete for a Mason's discretionary time and a Mason's discretionary dollars. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the Shrine has certain needs, right? They need a steady stream of candidates from a limited pool. They require financial resources to feed their social and charitable programs. The Blue Lodges, and the thing is like the Shrine has to, they have to get their members from existing Masons. right? So it's in their
Right.
interest to have lots and lots of members that are made Masons, but not to have those members be super active in the Blue Lodge, right? Because then they might not have
Right.
time to be part of the shrine. So the Blue Lodge, on the other hand, they need growth from the community. They have a retention problem, and they need engagement from its members, right? And so it's in the Blue Lodge likes, the Grand Masters like to do the 1-day classes, because they get new members, right? The Shrine likes it because they have a pool of candidates and members that they can pull from, right?
Absolutely. Right.
And so it's these kinds of dynamics that you have to look at when you're trying to innovate out of your way out of a problem, right? So just to say, well, right. So if you say, well, we're not going to do 1-day classes anymore, that's great. But what are you going to do to increase membership and increase engaged membership, right? It doesn't really help, right? Just to say, well, that's a bad idea. We're not going to do it. Well, okay, great. But what are we going to do? So there's a process that we use in innovation to innovate. Let me show you what that looks like. So that looks like this, right? So it really consists of four steps, really 5 steps, but it's 4 steps. So we have, we start with research, right? And then analysis, and then synthesis, and realization. Realization is basically building something, making something, right? And so on the from the left is, the things on the left are all about understanding, and the things on the right are all about making. The things on the top are kind of abstract things, and the things on the bottom are kind of real things, right? So like with research, those are behavioral observations. I can see that, right? On the top, it's more of an abstract thing. And in the middle of it is sense intent, right? So what are you trying to do? What are you trying to solve for? Right. And this is all outlined in a really, really good book that was written by one of my professors named Vijay Kumar. And I'll put that stuff in the show notes. But basically it's called 101 Design Methods, which is really about innovation. I'm just to warn you, I'm getting output problems again, so we may have to.
Yep, I'm starting to hear them as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mimo call.
Thanks. I don't think it's the call. I think it might have something to do with my system. I think maybe I need a new Mac is what I need. But anyway,
it's always about you buying new equipment. I know how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see how far we can get.
Yeah. So, Jacinta just came on, but it says Brother Daniel Upton from South Australia. I'm the youngest Mason at 40 in both my craft lodges, where the average is 65 to 75. The generation about me is all about fraternity, and my generation wants education. And that's exactly what we're talking about, kind of, is that sort of problem and how you innovate your way out of it. He goes on to say that the marked degree in my constitution has lost over 45% of its members in the last 10 years due to death. We're down to 400 members max. Unfortunately, in the country where I am at least, there is no young people interested, and there is, due to age average, can't relate to them to get them in. A brother of mine who's 93 is a past assistant grandmaster told me I was an exception. How sad is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And it's, and this is, this is where
That's crazy.
This is where you have big intractable problems that are ripe for innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing to do, right? The first thing you have to do is kind of understand and frame the problem. And the first thing to do that with is you need to have data, right? And this is something that in Masonry we're terrible at. John Rourke, if you talk to him over at the Masonic Roundtable, did a project where he wanted to go to the Grand Lodges and get, just information about membership. I mean, not personal information, just general information. And the Grand Lodges were incredibly uncooperative, right? And he told me he was actually shocked about that. And I mean, I think he was on the show when he talked about that. You know, he said he was really shocked at how little, how little support that he was able to get from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think part of it is that they just don't want to know.
Oh, absolutely.
They're afraid of what they're going to find. So it's at this point that we crashed for the second time. We suspect that this technical issue had something to do with the way that Facebook comments were displayed, because our software vendor had to remove that feature while they updated it to Facebook's new specifications. So with that said, let's go on with the show as at the point which we resumed. Hey everybody, thank you. We've made a couple of adjustments, and let's see, it says reduce frame rate. Oh well. So hopefully this will we'll be able to continue here. So Jason, where were we? Keep me honest here.
Boy, I don't know. I lost my train of thought. I want to put us back on a little bit though.
Yeah.
Did you read Hodap's blog last week?
Yeah. What?
Last week? I'm sorry, not last week. Today. He posted today. Mm-hmm. Today he posted about Grandmaster of New Jersey.
Oh yeah. Roger Quintana.
His, right. Yeah. And if you look at the list of things that he's done in his first month in office, New Jersey can now open and do business on the EA and the Fellowcraft degree. Mm-hmm. Lowered the number to constitute a new lodge from 50 to 25. 50. To get a new lodge, you had to have 50 people. That's not just insane. It's obnoxious.
Well, that's insane for DC, right?
No, that's insane. What are we, the 1920s? Get 50 people? Come on. Allowed the ritual to be translated to other languages for approval. Allowed a chamber of reflection as a tool to lodges that want to use it. He recognized Cuba. That I don't really care about, but sorry. Made Senator Robert Mendez a Mason on site. Established a Grand Lodge level, a Right Worshipful Grand Education Officer, and a Right Worshipful District Education Officer that's separate from ritual instructors. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really good stuff. Established a Right Worshipful Grand Almoner, and established 4 new affinity lodges. First month. Those are his accomplishments. That's pretty great. I mean, he's cooking with Crisco. And that's, I mean, to say nothing of Masonry and how slow we move, that guy is turning a battleship quick. Mm-hmm. Pretty great. But again, there he is. He is addressing things, what you talked about, which is, can we legislate our way out of it a little bit? Yeah, right here. You can now open and do business on the EA and the Fellowcraft. Why is that important? It's important because when you have EAs and Fellowcrafts, they're immediately part of your lodge, because now you can do business with them in the room. Whereas before, those guys had to go and sit out in the refectory for a whole meeting until they were Master Masons. This gives them more time to develop, to learn, and to be in lodge growing. That's huge. The number for a new lodge from 50 to 25. It encourages new ideas and new lodges and new groups of guys to pop up. That's amazing. So I mean, like here's a guy who's taking your principles to heart. Although it sounds like he's doing it, shot out of a shotgun.
Well, kind of, but like a lot of these things are pretty well known. I mean, they've been piloted by other grand jurisdictions, and they've worked really well.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily see an issue with a lot of what he's doing. I would say the best thing he's done is bring back the Chamber of Reflection, which we will talk about next week.
We will.
But
There's so much cross promotion going on
I
between
know,
this weekend.
I know.
Super fun.
Yeah, and hopefully like next week will be like a single live stream. Wouldn't that be cool?
You don't like our commercial breaks? Whatever.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting, and you know, going back to our Fredonia
Sure.
issue, right? So you're the Grand Master of Fredonia, right? And what do you know? How do you gather data, right? So like you need to innovate your way out of this problem. And who was it? Jacinta?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was talking about like his Mark program is down to 400 people. I mean, this is a huge problem. And like, you know, you basically got a patient on life support. And so how do you systematically build them back up?
Right.
So the first question is getting some data and getting some research. So surveys are good, but they're very limited tools. Like the first thing that I hear people, it's like, well, let's do a survey, right? Well, which is great. But as we saw back a few shows ago when we talked about what was it, James McNaughton's book? I'm probably getting his first name wrong.
Was McNaughton's book. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Reclaiming the Soul of Freemasonry, right? They used a survey instrument, and they asked people, would you be interested in joining a group that promotes true friendship? And he said, well, 60, 90, 80% said yes. Right. Well, that's great. But what people tell you and what people actually do often are two different things, especially if the questions are not worded in a very, very neutral way. Right. So if you ask people like, do you love America? Right. Who's going to say, well, no, right.
In the political side, we call that a push poll is the technical term for that. And it is a very real thing.
Yeah.
And people use push polls so that they can go on, they can go and be a talking head and support their point with data, but the data is useless.
Right.
They push people into those answers.
Right. And then the other thing is that you have a self-selection bias of people who answer the survey, right?
Correct.
So there's a lot of people, right? So, but if they were to ask, how many group activities these same people participated in every month, right? He might have gotten a different answer, right? So in other words, you ask people like, instead of asking them, would you be interested in joining it? They would say, well, how many group activities do you do outside of your church or outside of work? Right. And if someone says 0, how likely are they going to be to join a fraternity? Right.
Exactly.
So,
sure.
So there's ways of getting to kind of interesting data and looking at things like direct observation. Right. So for example, just keeping track of, when you have a special program, do more people show up? How many more people, right? And start tracking that. So the first rule of thumb with research is that attitudes don't equal behavior, right? And then the second, so once you've got some research, the next thing you have to do is kind of make some sense out of it, right? So as I showed you before in the diagram with the shrine. Now, that whole like shrine Blue Lodge thing, right? I just sort of like, that's a hypothesis, right? I just sort of made that up. I don't really have any data to really support that, but there's a change that you could design as an experiment, right? That would make that, you'd be able to prove that out. So the first thing, we've got the research, then we do analysis on it. And basically with analysis, it's what does this data mean? What does it tell us? And from there, you're trying to get to insights, right? So for example, like in Fredonia, the majority of lodges are on life support, right? But the majority of Masons, of active Masons, are not in the majority of lodges. They're in a few lodges, right? So it's like, what are those few lodges doing that the majority of lodges are not doing? Because they're on this sort of systemic life support. And so there are frameworks that we use in innovation, right? One is, and you can if you Google design thinking, there's I'm going to put like a reading list together in the show notes. But like for example, one of them is when you look at an experience, right, and you have an experience called there's a framework called the 5 E's of an experience. So there's entice, like how do you get people to know and like get awareness for your experience. Enter, how do you begin the experience. Engage, exit, and extend, right? So if you think about a degree, right, they all go through the 5 E's. How do we entice people? Well, you know a Mason, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
And maybe they notice your Masonic ring, or maybe they notice that you have a sticker on your car, and they say, "Oh, are you a Freemason? What's that all about?" Right? Entering, right? They're prepared as a candidate. They go through an intake process. They're investigated. Engage is sort of the content of the degree, right? Exit is what happens after the degree. Like how do they sort of process it? And then extend, you're given a catechism. Right. So that's a way of kind of breaking down an experience. There's another framework called POEMS, right? People, objects, environments, messages, and services. And what the frameworks do is they tell you what you need in order to, understand. So it tells you like what kinds of data do you need to get. So for example, for Freemasonry, right, we pretty much know the people involved, right? There's, you've got your master masons and your officers and stuff like that. We pretty much know what the objects are, right? We've got aprons and gavels and, we know what the environments are, right? Lodge, Grand Lodge, stuff like that. Messages, right? What messages are we sending? Right? So for example, when we initiate a guy and then we make him sit in the dining room during a meeting for 3 hours while we read the minutes, pay the bills, argue over, what to have for dinner for the next week. What message are we sending them? Right?
Yeah.
And then
precisely.
And then services, like what perks do we give? What things do you actually get as a Mason that make it worthwhile? And too often we don't ever really look at that, right? We don't really know.
Absolutely.
So these frameworks are a really good way of understanding it. So once you get an insight, right? So the insight might be, you know what? The problem is that these lodges are afraid of going under, right? They don't want to lose their power, right? They, and no Grand Master wants to be the guy who's going to arrest a charter and send, a lot of what I hear is like, well, we can't arrest the charter because Freemason will be dead in that part of the state.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So
absolutely.
So the next thing that you want to do in the innovation process is look at who's solved the problem. Right. So for example, we talked about a year ago now to Heather Fulton, right, who was a member of Lit Humane. Well, they're so small, right? The way that they've work is that they don't have a lot of lodges that they can call upon. So what they have is they have a circle, right? Like a study circle. And when the study circle gets big enough that they can actually support a lodge, then they get a charter. So what you might say is, well, that seems to work pretty well. So actually, Heather is a member of a lodge in Seattle that's a much bigger, more resourced lodge. She travels to Seattle a couple times a year to do, to attend lodge meetings and, they'll maybe initiate members and stuff like that. And then go back for the, basically everything except opening, closing, and doing degrees is done through the study circle, right?
Right.
So if you're a Grand Master, you might say, well, we could try an experiment where we take a lodge that's on life support and we suspend its charter. We don't arrest it. We just suspend it. We put it in hibernation. Right. And we could say, well, for the time being, you as you Life Support Lodge,
Mm-hmm.
are now members of this other more well-resourced lodge, right? And you get your charter back when you're healthy again. And here's what you need to be healthy. Right?
Yeah, that's reasonable. And this is again another topic for another show, because I think there's a lot to talk about here. Recently, I've begun thinking about this on my own, but are lodges immortal? Do lodges die? And if so, how do we know they're dead or they're just in hibernation? And it's a really big question for us, because, a lodge might be weak, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's dead. I mean, how do I know it's dead? We know that everything has a life cycle, and we talk about it in our ritual and everything, that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to everything. And the end is just as important as the beginning. And so, how do we know when a lodge is dead? And we as Masons, I mean, almost all Masons, this is an interesting part, this is where attitudes come in. And attitudes of Masons are, for the most part, almost everyone is kind of into history of some sort. They like history, especially older history. So we value that. And we're a little reticent to change. So what that means is that these lodges that are on life support, they might be dead, but we don't let them die. Because, maybe it's got a low number. Maybe it's a lodge number 5. And we went, we can't let lodge number 5 go. Like we lodge number 5 goes away, then what do we have? And so in DC, even we had a couple of very, very old lodges. We have lodge number 2 and lodge number 6 that lost their charters for different reasons. But one surrendered its charter to the Grand Lodge and said, listen, keep this until we're ready again to have it a lodge number 6. And lodge number 2 just lost it because they just owed so much money that finally the Grand Lodge said, nope, we're taking all of your stuff. And they seized their charter. And it's a bit controversial, because one lodge now exists again, which is lodge number 6, and one does not. And
full
as far as
disclosure,
anyone
I'm a
can tell-
member of number 6.
That's right. Lodge number 6. And so, lodge number 2, there's been swell before for them to revive number 2, but it's met with a lot of resistance, because a lot of people think 2 is dead. That once the Grand Lodge seized that charter now cannot exist again. And so it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult. Once you identify struggling lodges, do we let them die? Does the charter go away and we move those guys from that lodge into a lodge that is healthy? Or, do we take the guys from the healthy lodges and populate the unhealthy lodges? Which is the strategy that works best?
Yeah. I mean, I think for that kind of thing, if you don't want to, look, there's no law that says you have to destroy a lodge, right? You can put it to sleep for a while. And,
Sure.
and if you were to sort of demote these lodges into circles, right, for a time, they have an incentive to get back into health, right? The guys who now are in the lodge that they're now affiliated with have an incentive to get them out of their lodge and into their own lodge, right? They're kind of, in a way, they're kind of, babysitting, right? So there's an incentive there.
Sure.
Right. And so they just need to change some practices and get some younger members and maybe do some outreach and stuff like that. And then some that are on life support will die, right? Because there's no saving them, or there's no appetite for change or appetite for doing that. And that's fine. That's the way it should be. But you give the lodges a chance to get healthy again. And if they're not, look, if all you've got is a bunch of, older gentlemen who like to have their coffee and donuts and whatever after lodge, and that's all they want to do, and they want to, they want the lodge to die with them. That's their prerogative, right? They're allowed to do that.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got a couple of comments here that are great. So Daniel, so it looks like Daniel's got Jacinta's Facebook, but that's all right.
Okay.
Daniel said the study circle sounds like a great idea. Could you expand on what that would consist of? Any proactive action would have to be done by me, again, as I'm the youngest by at least 20 years, and I already travel 60 to 150 miles just for a meeting. One of my lodges I'm a junior warden in has an active membership of 7 or 8, but it's the only lodge in a town of 15,000 people. Help me, X-Oriente, you're my only hope. Oh, I'm feeling bad for you that we are your only hope. Yeah, so the study circle that they use, that idea is actually an idea that the Scottish Rite uses as well in the Southern jurisdiction. They call it clubs. They call it a Scottish Rite club. And if you've got a small local group that's not big enough to be a valley, it's really a relatively informal way for people to meet. You're in the circle idea. They're not opening and closing a lodge. They're just getting together to talk masonry, to kind of share that bond of fraternalism, and that on a set schedule. But they're going once, maybe twice a year to the open and close a lodge to see ritual work, that kind of stuff, to initiate new members. And that's something that definitely works. It especially works in places where the population is widely spread out. So that might work for you, Daniel. Lodge, or just put them back under dispensation. And that's a really interesting idea, Mike. And I think that answers a little bit of my question about how do you know when a lodge is dead? Because, lodges limp along. And as long as you've got 3 guys, 4 guys, you can open and close a lodge. You can make it work. And I think that putting them back under dispensation, if you see a lodge that it can't pay its bills, it can't put the butts in the seats, it's just limping along, maybe there ought to be some sort of a trigger that puts a lodge back under dispensation. And if they can't get themselves back into a workable form, it dies. It goes away. Then it's out of a Grand Master's hand, who has to say, no, you're dead.
Right.
I'm
Sorry.
just taking it all away from you. Right. There was at least an intermediate period where they said, listen, we're going to give this a chance. We're going to try and see, we're going to throw everything we can at it. But if it doesn't work, it's got to go away, and so lodge is back under dispensation for a time.
Yeah. Could work.
Go, Mike. So I'm curious so how do you solve then our Fredonian problem? Ourselves through this through the process of the diagram that you showed with the 4 corners to it, right? We've gotten our data back. We have now understood something. How do we synthesize the data?
So what we do is we start with how might we, right? So you say, given this insight, right, how might we fix it? And by looking at what other people have done. So my old design professor, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet, which I think is actually a William Gibson quote, right? So somebody in another field has already solved your problem. You just have to find out and then sort of this analogy to kind of bring it into your own problem sphere, right? So somebody else has solved this problem. Let's go out and find who has solved this problem, and then kind of by that. So once you've got an idea, right? So we say, okay, well, we think that this idea of putting a lodge into suspended animation and having a healthier lodge help out the unhealthy lodge to get back on their feet, we think that this is a good idea. So the next thing you do is you try it, but you don't try it at a grand scale. You don't close, 60% of your lodges immediately. That's chaos, right? So you pilot it with two lodges. You take two unhealthy lodges. You say, here's what we're going to do. You'll still be members of this lodge. You're going to, there's a host of things that have to be kind of figured out, like who gets the dues money, what happens to the per capita. Well, if the charter is under hibernation, the per capita is under hibernation as well. Lodge, right? So you have to kind of but what you're doing is you're piloting it to learn what are the problems that we're going to have to solve along the way when we scale this thing up, right? So I'm going to just suspended animation program, the circle program or whatever, on two lodges, and we're gonna see, can we, and maybe it's like a 3-year program, right?
Right.
And we're gonna just see, can we bring these lodges back to life, right? And if it succeeds, great. If it dies, that tells you something too, right? And if 2 of the lodges succeed, you learn from that prototype, right? And then once you do that, you scale it up a notch, and it's iterative. You can just keep iterating and iterating and iterating until you've changed culture, right? I mean, you got to think back in the day when they introduced the 3rd degree. I'm sure that's how they did it, right? They somebody wrote a, hey, I've got this innovation called Master Mason degree. Let's give it a try. And then a couple more lodges, and pretty soon Grand Lodge said, yeah, all right, we'll do that. We'll add it to the mix. Right. And by the way, no more innovation.
Right. Right. Now that we've done this big one, we're all through.
We're done. We're done. No more.
Right.
Yeah.
This was the cutoff. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's great. I think that what I think we've shown relatively conclusively is that change is possible in Masonry, and there is a good way, and change can be really healthy for everybody involved, and it doesn't have to be terrible.
Yeah. So I want to leave you guys with a story. So so you guys know I work in advertising. My main client is Samsung, right? And there's this great story that they tell at Samsung. So Samsung, like, for most of its history, right, it started out as this like all kinds of stuff, and they started making consumer electronics, but the consumer electronics they were making were kind of cheap and not real good, and they were just sort of like a kind of an also ran to Sony, but sort of the kind of Korean equivalent of it. And so the guy who they the chairman who had inherited the company, because it's a family run company, who had inherited it from his father, right, decided, like, this is back in like the early 90s, I think, that he had enough. So he gets all of his executives together in this boardroom in a hotel in Frankfurt, and they've actually in Germany, and they actually bought the boardroom where this happened, dismantled it in Germany, shipped it to Korea, and reassembled it in the Samsung headquarters because it's so important to them.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And so he basically said, we're going to be different. We're going to be innovative. We're going to be the leaders, right? He said, change everything but your wife. Isn't that great? Change everything but your wife. And that to me is like that. We could take that as our mandate, right?
Right.
Change everything but your wife. The wife is the body of Masonry. Yeah.
Eric, before you keep going, we just died.
We did?
I think so.
We're streaming.
Are we? Oh yeah, we are. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Never mind. No, we're still alive.
Yeah. So like the wife in our case, right, is the body of Masonry, is the degrees,
Absolutely.
Is the ritual, is the right. But everything else is up for grabs, and we should take advantage of that.
I agree. I totally agree. That's a good one. Change everything but the wife.
Change everything but your wife. All right. So let's call this show. all 4 parts of it, 5 parts of it or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm going to do
Whatever.
some work on my end and see if we can't prevent this from happening again.
Yeah.
If you like, and I
Up
just
to
wanted
and
to,
including a new MacBook.
yeah, well, or an iMac or something.
Right.
But anyway,
Or iMac.
thank you
Let's
for
find the
sticking
most
with us.
expensive way to solve that. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it may just be a new hard drive, maybe time.
Yeah, it could be that too.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, thank you for being with us. Thank you for sticking with us. A special thanks to our executive producers. We want to know what you think. Aside from the technical issues, drop us a line at xoriente@gmail.com. Visit us on our Patreon page at patreon.com/xoriente. Leave a comment on our Facebook page or send us an email. And thanks very much for being here.
Thanks,
Jason,
guys.
anything else you want to add?
Nope, not at this point. Thank you to our executive producers. It really helps us. We really, really appreciate your support. And thanks for hanging with us through all of our fun little glitchiness. We'll see you guys next time.
All right. Take care.